This is a story about a Father's Day gift that changed everything. My daughter Samantha sent me a package that was meant to be a surprise, but when my wife Jessica examined it closely, she quietly told me not to open it. When I asked why, she pointed to something I had missed entirely, and my blood ran cold. Within 10 minutes, law enforcement was at our door. The contents of that box would shock anyone who heard about it. It all started with a heated argument about money. My daughter had screamed at me that she needed her inheritance immediately, not after I was gone. Her coffee cup slipped from her trembling fingers and shattered against our hardwood floor, the dark liquid spreading across the expensive Persian carpet we had owned for years. I was clutching the inheritance paperwork tightly, watching 30 years of careful financial planning become ammunition in my daughter's desperate battle for cash. Samantha, I told her firmly, I am not your personal cash machine. You will receive your inheritance when the appropriate time comes. Her husband Peter reclined further into our leather couch, that infuriating smirk growing wider on his face. He suggested I should help them out since she was my only child, asking what difference a few $1,000s would make. A few $1,000s. The man had absolutely no shame whatsoever. The previous month it had been gambling debts he needed covered. Before that, it was Samantha's excessive shopping habits. The demands for money never ceased. They only became more brazen with each passing request. I reminded them that I had been bailing them out for 3 consecutive years now. My body protested as I slowly rose from my seat, my 66-year-old joints aching with the movement. My retirement savings were not their personal financial institution to withdraw from whenever they pleased. Jessica appeared in the doorway, nervously wringing a kitchen towel between her hands, pleading with everyone to remain calm and discuss matters rationally. Samantha whirled on her mother, demanding to know what was reasonable about her father hoarding hundreds of thousands of dollars while they were drowning in financial obligations. I pointed out quietly that the debt she mentioned was entirely of her own creation, the result of her own decisions and choices. The family photograph on our mantelpiece had been turned face down. Had it toppled during Samantha's outburst, or had someone deliberately positioned it that way? The silver frame caught the overhead light, reflecting nothing but empty brightness back at us. Peter leaned forward with his elbows resting on his knees, addressing me dismissively as old man, and suggesting I was not getting any younger, so why not share my wealth while I was still alive to witness their appreciation. Old man. The disrespect left a bitter taste in my mouth, especially coming from someone who had never maintained steady employment, who survived off my daughter's credit accounts and my occasional handouts. I worked 43 years for that money, I told them, each word coming out harder than the one before. 43 years of 12-hour shifts, dinners missed with family, vacations that never happened, all so Samantha could enjoy a comfortable upbringing, and so Jessica and I could retire with some dignity. Samantha laughed bitterly, asking what dignity there was in hoarding wealth while your own daughter suffered. I observed her designer purse, her freshly highlighted hair, her expensive jewelry, and Peter's brand new athletic shoes. Their supposed suffering appeared remarkably comfortable from where I stood. I told her that her suffering was entirely self-inflicted. The words escaped before I could stop them. Every crisis she faced, every emergency, every desperate plea for financial assistance, she had manufactured them all herself. The silence that followed stretched tight as a wire about to snap. Jessica stepped fully into the room, her complexion pale with worry. She started to suggest we should reconsider, but Samantha cut her off, demanding to know if we should continue enabling my selfishness, pretending I was a loving father rather than a miserly hoarder. The accusations struck me like physical blows. Greedy, selfish, unloving. 43 years of sacrifice, and this was how I was repaid. Peter rose to his feet, his expression transforming into something uglier and more threatening. He accused me of enjoying watching them struggle, suggesting it made me feel powerful to deny them assistance. I ordered them both to leave my house immediately. Samantha challenged me, pointing out that this was the house her mother had helped finance, the house where she had grown up. She insisted I could not simply throw out my own daughter. I told her to watch me do exactly that. But neither of them moved. They stood there like predators who had detected weakness in their prey, waiting for me to retreat, waiting for the customary apology, the usual compromise, the inevitable check written to purchase temporary household peace. But not this time. I walked to the front entrance and opened it wide. Cool evening air rushed inside, carrying the fragrance of honeysuckle and distant sounds of neighbors laughing together. Normal families having normal conversations. How long had it been since our family had shared laughter? Without turning around, I instructed Samantha to take her husband and leave. I told her not to return until she was prepared to have a respectful discussion about her financial difficulties and solutions that did not involve accessing my wallet. She hissed that I would regret this decision. When I was elderly and ill and required someone to care for me, she wanted me to remember this moment. Remember how I had chosen money over my own family. Her heels clicked across the hardwood like gunfire as she stormed toward the exit. Peter followed close behind, pausing at the threshold to mutter that this was far from over, that family does not abandon family. The door slammed with enough force to rattle the window panes. The resulting silence weighed heavier than all their shouting had. I remained frozen at the entrance, my hand still gripping the brass door handle. Through the decorative glass panels, I watched Samantha's luxury vehicle reverse aggressively out of our driveway, tires spinning against the pavement. Jessica approached softly from behind, calling my name. I turned slowly to survey the living room, which resembled a battlefield aftermath. Coffee stains darkened the Persian rug we had purchased for our 20th wedding anniversary. Inheritance documents lay scattered across the floor like autumn leaves. The overturned family photograph caught the lamplight, its silver frame seeming to mock our situation. I whispered to myself about the 43 years I had devoted to work. Overtime shifts during her high school years so she could have fashionable clothing, textbooks for college, that automobile for her 16th birthday. My voice caught in my throat as I recalled the wedding celebration we could not truly afford but paid for regardless. Jessica gathered the scattered paperwork with careful, deliberate movements. She mentioned that Samantha was struggling, but I interrupted more sharply than intended, pointing out that her gambling addiction was her own choice. Every visit to the casino, every online wager, every falsehood about where the money disappeared to, these were all her personal choices. I approached the mantelpiece and righted the family photograph. 5-year-old Samantha smiled back at me from the image, gap-toothed and innocent, perched on my shoulders at the county fair. When had that joyful child transformed into this manipulative stranger demanding my life savings? I asked Jessica if she remembered when Samantha wanted that elaborate dollhouse for Christmas, the one from the upscale toy store downtown. I had worked double shifts for 2 months to afford that gift. Jessica's silence served as her answer. We both remembered everything, just as we remembered the ballet classes, the summer camps, the designer shoes, because all her friends wore the same brands. Every sacrifice gladly made for our daughter's happiness. And now she hurled coffee cups at me because I would not surrender my retirement fund on demand. Jessica pointed out that Samantha had thrown the cup at the floor, not directly at me. The distinction felt meaningless to me. The violence was identical whether aimed at my person or my possessions. The disrespect remained the same. I retrieved one of the inheritance documents from the floor. The legal terminology blurred as I examined it, though I knew every provision by memory. Years of meticulous planning, conservative investing, delayed personal gratification. All arranged so Samantha would have financial security after we were gone. Jessica suggested quietly that Peter's influence was responsible, that he filled our daughter's mind with notions about what we supposedly owed her. I responded that Peter had not created her greed. He had merely given it permission to reveal itself. The harsh reality hung suspended between us. Our daughter had evolved into someone we barely recognized anymore, and we had enabled this transformation by always capitulating, always writing the check, always smoothing over her latest catastrophe with our money. My phone vibrated with an incoming text from an unfamiliar number, though I immediately recognized the writing style. The message expressed hope that I was satisfied with myself. It claimed the children needed winter clothing and school supplies, but apparently my precious savings mattered more to me than my own grandchildren. The message concluded by warning me not to expect to see them anytime soon. The grandchildren, the ultimate weapon in Samantha's arsenal of manipulation. Emma and Jake, 8 and 6 years old respectively, innocent casualties caught in their mother's campaign for my finances. She knew precisely where to strike to inflict maximum emotional damage. I showed Jessica the message, and her expression crumbled with distress. She wondered aloud whether Samantha would actually follow through on keeping the children away from us. But we both knew she absolutely would. She had done it previously, during smaller disagreements. A week of no contact here, 2 weeks there. whenever we failed to immediately comply with her monetary demands. The children were being utilized as bargaining chips in her endless pursuit of our money. Jessica started to suggest we might want to reconsider our position, but I cut her off firmly. No more. I refused to be held captive by threats concerning the grandchildren. I would not teach Emma and Jake that affection could be purchased, that family relationships were merely transactions to be negotiated. Jessica flinched at my vehemence. In 38 years of marriage, she had rarely witnessed me this furious. Even during our worst disagreements, I had never spoken with such cold determination. But something fundamental had shifted that evening. Some essential understanding about my daughter, about our relationship, about the future I had envisioned for our family. The fantasy of loving sacrifice had disintegrated as completely as that shattered coffee cup. 6 days afterward, I sat on our front porch with the Sunday newspaper, attempting to find normalcy in the Father's Day morning routine. The coffee in my mug had grown cold, but I continued holding it anyway, observing neighbors emerge for their weekend activities. The Henderson family was loading their vehicle for what appeared to be a family excursion. The Patels were tending their garden, their laughter carrying across our peaceful suburban street. Jessica moved about inside the kitchen, the gentle clatter of breakfast dishes floating through the open window. We had spent the week engaged in cautious conversation, carefully navigating around the Samantha-shaped void in our family structure. Neither of us had received any communication from her since that evening. No telephone calls. No text messages, no unexpected visits demanding money or reconciliation. The complete silence felt unnatural and deliberate. In 3 years of financial emergencies, Samantha had never gone this long without reaching out. Typically, by the 3rd day, she would be calling with apologies and smaller requests, testing the waters before launching into her next major appeal for funds. But this situation was different. The totality of the silence seemed calculated, almost like the stillness before a tempest. Part of me felt relieved by the quiet. Another part remained worried about what might follow. The rumble of a delivery vehicle interrupted my thoughts. I glanced up from the sports section to observe a brown delivery truck slowing in front of our residence. Unusual. We were not expecting any packages, and Sunday deliveries were uncommon unless someone had paid extra for weekend service. The driver hopped out, consulted his electronic device, then retrieved a medium-sized package from the cargo area. He approached with the professional efficiency of someone earning holiday overtime pay. He confirmed my name and wished me a happy Father's Day, mentioning that someone must think highly of me to pay for Sunday delivery service. I signed for the package and studied the shipping label as he departed. No return address was visible, only generic shipping information. The box felt surprisingly lightweight for its dimensions, roughly the size of a shoebox, but weighing perhaps 2 pounds at most. Jessica called from the kitchen doorway, asking who had sent the package. I told her I had no idea, and carried it inside, placing it on the coffee table, where inheritance documents had been scattered just 6 days earlier. She approached with a curious but cautious expression. Jessica had always been more suspicious of unexpected deliveries than I was, the result of too many years hearing about package bombs and mail fraud on the evening news. She suggested it might be from the grandchildren, though her tone lacked conviction. Emma had inquired about Father's Day when we had seen them the previous month, before Samantha had weaponized them against us, before all the threats and ultimatum. I pushed those painful thoughts aside. It could be from them, I agreed, though something about the situation felt wrong. The timing seemed too convenient, too deliberate. Emma would not have arranged special Sunday delivery service. Jessica leaned closer, examining the package with the methodical attention she brought to everything from grocery shopping to crossword puzzles. Her fingers traced the edges of the shipping label. She told me quietly, but urgently, not to open. When I asked why, she directed my attention to something I had completely overlooked in my casual handling. She pointed out the holes, explaining they were for breathing, which meant something alive was inside the container. My stomach dropped immediately. Now that she had identified them, I could clearly see the tiny punctures in the cardboard, barely visible unless you specifically looked for them. Small, precise perforations that someone had obviously created intentionally. I repeated her words about breathing holes, my voice flat with growing dread. She confirmed that something living was contained within, and the question was what, exactly? We stood motionless in our living room, staring at the innocent-looking package, as if it might suddenly sprout legs and escape. The morning sunlight streaming through our windows seemed less warm now, the suburban quietness more ominous and threatening. Jessica whispered her question about who would send us something alive. But even as she asked, I felt cold certainty settling deep in my chest. The timing on Father's Day was no coincidence. The anonymous sender who knew our address, our daily schedule, our vulnerabilities. Someone sufficiently angry about our recent confrontation to plan something this elaborate, this deliberately cruel. This was not a gift. This was something else entirely. From inside the container came the faintest sound, a soft rustling that made us both freeze in place. The noise ceased as quickly as it had begun, leaving us in tense silence. Jessica seized my arm, her fingernails digging into my skin through the cotton fabric of my polo shirt. She breathed her question about whether I had heard that. I nodded, unable to trust my voice to remain steady. Whatever occupied that box was very much alive, and was now awakening. A soft hissing sound emerged from the cardboard, barely audible but unmistakably real. We both froze completely, staring at the package as though it might detonate at any moment. The sound stopped, and silence stretched between us like a held breath. Then it came again, longer this time, a distinct hiss that sent ice coursing through my veins. Jessica's grip on my arm tightened until her nails penetrated the fabric of my shirt. She whispered my name and urged me to call someone immediately. My hands trembled as I retrieved my phone, muscle memory taking control while my mind struggled to process what we were confronting. The numbers felt foreign beneath my shaking fingers. The emergency dispatcher answered, and I explained we had a suspicious package containing something alive. The words tumbled out faster than I had intended. I described how it had been delivered that morning with no return address, and was now producing sounds. The dispatcher asked me to describe the noises we were hearing. I glanced at Jessica, who nodded encouragingly. The hissing had stopped again, but we both knew it would resume. I described it as hissing, like a serpent, though the thought felt too dangerous to articulate fully. The dispatcher confirmed she was sending officers to our location immediately and instructed us to maintain safe distance from the package and avoid any attempt to open it. She asked if we could relocate to another room. I explained we were approximately 6 feet away in our living room, and asked if we should evacuate the house entirely. She advised us to remain inside, but keep our distance, estimating officers would arrive within 10 minutes. She emphasized that we should not touch or move the package under any circumstances. The line went quiet, except for the distant sound of the dispatcher typing. 10 minutes felt like an eternity when something potentially dangerous sat on our coffee table, growing more active with each passing moment. Jessica asked quietly who could have done this. It was the question I had been dreading. The answer seemed obvious, but voicing it aloud would make it real. It would acknowledge that our daughter had crossed a boundary I had never imagined possible. I admitted I was afraid to speculate, but my mind was already connecting dots I desperately did not want to see. The timing on Father's Day was not coincidental. The anonymous sender who knew our address, our habits, our weaknesses. Someone angry enough about our recent argument to orchestrate something this elaborate and malicious. Another sound from the box caused us both to retreat backward. Not merely hissing this time, but a rustling suggesting movement. Something shifting position within the confined space. Jessica mentioned the argument from 6 days prior, noting how furious Samantha had been when she departed. She did not need to speak Samantha's name. We were both thinking it, both arriving at the same terrible conclusion through different pathways of logic and dread. But this level of cruelty, I gestured at the package. This was not mere anger. This was something far worse. The word revenge hung unspoken between us, too ugly to voice but impossible to dismiss. Our daughter, the child we had raised and supported and loved despite her flaws, had sent us something designed to terrorize or injure us. The box rustled again, more insistently now. Whatever was inside had definitely awakened, probably confused by its surroundings, possibly agitated by our voices and movements. Jessica asked what kind of person would do this to their own parents. I suggested someone desperate, though the words felt wholly inadequate. Someone who believed they had been wronged. But deep down, I understood it was more than desperation. This required advanced planning, calculation, a degree of malice that indicated something fundamentally broken in the relationship between parent and child. Samantha had not simply lashed out in anger. She had crafted a deliberate act of psychological warfare against us. The sound of car doors closing outside made us both startle. Through the front window, I could see a police cruiser in our driveway. 2 officers walking toward our door with the purposeful stride of people trained to manage dangerous situations. Relief flooded through me so quickly it weakened my knees. Professional assistance had arrived. Soon, whatever nightmare lurked in that innocuous-looking package would become someone else's responsibility to handle safely. The doorbell rang, sharp and authoritative, in the tense quiet of our home. I opened the door before Officer Todd Reeves could knock a second time. His presence filled the doorframe, tall and solidly built, with the practiced alertness of someone experienced in handling domestic emergencies. His nameplate identified him as T. Reeves. He introduced himself and confirmed he had received our call about a suspicious package. I thanked him for his rapid response and stepped aside to allow him entry, indicating the package was in the living room. He wiped his boots on our welcome mat before crossing the threshold. Jessica appeared in the hallway, still wearing her apron, hands twisted nervously together. She expressed gratitude for his arrival, explaining we had not known what else to do. He assured her calmly that we had done exactly the right thing and asked to see the package. We led him to the living room, where the box sat on our coffee table, appearing smaller now that professional help had arrived. Officer Reeves approached carefully, pulling latex gloves from his utility belt. He asked when the package had arrived. I told him approximately 35 minutes ago, noting that someone had paid extra for Sunday delivery service. He examined the shipping label without touching the container, observing aloud the absence of a visible return address, and confirming we had heard sounds emanating from inside. Jessica said quietly that we had heard hissing, like a serpent, though she could not finish the sentence. Officer Reeves completed her thought matter-of-factly, mentioning he had handled similar situations previously. Most were non-venomous species, but he assured us they would take every precaution. He reached for his radio and called for animal control services, providing our address and describing the situation as a suspected snake delivery in a residential package. The radio crackled back with confirmation that animal control would respond within 20 minutes. Officer Reeves turned back to us, transitioning from procedural efficiency to investigative curiosity. He asked whether we had any idea who might have sent this package. It was the question I had been dreading. I felt Jessica's eyes on me, waiting to see how I would respond. I claimed ignorance, suggesting it was probably just teenagers playing a prank. His gaze sharpened slightly as he pointed out that young people would need access to live animals, shipping materials, and knowledge of our address. This required planning and resources beyond a typical prank. My mouth went dry. He was correct. Someone with means and motivation had deliberately sent us a serpent on Father's Day. He asked whether we had experienced any recent conflicts or family disagreements. Family disagreements. The phrase hung in the air like an accusation. Jessica tensed beside me as we both navigated the tightrope between honesty and familial loyalty. I managed to say that nothing had occurred that would lead to this. Officer Reeves studied my face, noting my hesitation, but he did not press further. Instead, he retrieved a small notebook and asked about any unusual charges on our credit cards recently, specifically mentioning pet stores or exotic animal suppliers. The question struck me like a physical blow. Pet stores. The memory crashed over me with horrible clarity. That charge I had noticed on last month's statement. Samantha had access to my credit card for emergencies. Reptile Palace, $127.50. I had assumed it was something for the grandchildren's entertainment. Not a serpent. Never a serpent. Officer Reeves asked if I was all right. I forced my expression back to neutral, though my heart hammered against my ribs. I assured him I was fine, just processing everything. But I was far from fine. The puzzle pieces were assembling themselves with horrifying clarity. The timing, the knowledge of our routines, the access to my credit card, the deliberate cruelty of selecting Father's Day. My daughter had sent me a snake. Officer Reeves asked whether we intended to file a formal report, explaining they could investigate the package's origin and pursue charges if they identified the sender. I looked at Jessica and saw the same conflict reflected in her eyes. Part of me wanted justice served, but the larger part, the part that had spent 34 years protecting Samantha despite her flaws, could not bring myself to turn her over to police authorities. I declined quietly, saying I did not want to make a mountain out of a molehill. If it was merely a prank, filing charges seemed excessive. Officer Reeves made a note, though his expression suggested he had encountered this response before.
Family loyalty trumping justice, even when family members crossed dangerous boundaries. Another vehicle pulled into our driveway. Through the window, I could see a white van with Animal Control Services painted on the side.
Officer Reeves identified the arrival as Mike Johnson, calling him the best wildlife specialist in the county. He assured us the situation would be resolved safely within the hour. But as I watched the animal control officer gather his equipment, I understood the real situation was only beginning. Mike Johnson from Animal Control worked with the methodical efficiency of someone who had managed stranger scenarios than ours. Within 20 minutes, he had safely extracted a 3-foot corn snake from the shipping container, confirmed it was not venomous, and loaded it into a secure carrier for transport to a local reptile rescue organization.
He commented that it was a beautiful specimen and that someone had paid good money for this particular snake. Corn snakes made excellent pets when properly cared for, he noted. It was a shame someone had used one for whatever this was.
Officer Reeves shook hands with both of us before departing, advising me to call if I remembered anything else about potential senders. Even pranks like this could escalate if left unchecked, he cautioned. I nodded, maintaining the appearance of cooperation while my mind churned with darker possibilities. Both vehicles disappeared down our quiet suburban street, leaving Jessica and me alone with the morning's aftermath. The living room felt different now, somehow violated despite the professional cleanup. The coffee table bore faint water stains where Mike had disinfected the surface. The scattered inheritance documents had been restacked neatly, but their symbolic significance had shifted. They were no longer instruments of family planning, but rather evidence of the betrayal that had triggered this morning's events. Jessica busied herself in the kitchen, running water in the sink with unnecessary vigor. Stress cleaning was her standard response to family crises. I stood at the front window, watching the Hendersons return from their Father's Day excursion, their vehicle loaded with picnic gear and children's laughter. Normal families enjoying normal Sunday mornings. Normal fathers who did not receive venomous surprises from their daughters. The credit card charge burned in my memory like a brand. Reptile Palace, $127.50, 3 weeks prior. Immediately following our argument about the inheritance. Perfect timing for planning revenge. My phone felt heavy in my hands as I scrolled to Samantha's contact information. Her smiling photograph looked back at me, an image from Emma's birthday celebration last year, before the financial demands had escalated, before the threats about grandchild access, before this morning's snake delivery. Jessica asked quietly from the kitchen doorway whether I was actually going to call her. I told her I needed to know with certainty. She asked what I would do if Samantha admitted to it. The question hung between us like a challenge. What action could a father take against a daughter who had crossed such a fundamental line? I did not have an answer yet, but I knew the conversation was necessary. The phone rang twice before she answered. Samantha's voice carried artificial brightness, the tone she employed when she wanted something or was concealing something. She asked how my Father's Day was going. My grip tightened on the phone. The question could have been natural if she was innocent. If she was guilty, it was cruel mockery. I described it as an interesting morning and asked whether she knew anything about a strange Father's Day gift I had received. Her denial came quickly, almost too quickly. She claimed ignorance and asked what had happened. But it was what occurred next that confirmed my worst suspicions. In the background, unmistakably, I heard Peter's quiet laughter, not the surprised chuckle of someone hearing unexpected news, but the satisfied snicker of someone who believed they had gotten away with something clever. The sound hit me like a physical blow. All doubt vanished in that moment of careless amusement. My daughter had sent me a snake, and her husband found it entertaining. I explained it away as just some confusion with the delivery, fighting to keep my voice steady. Nothing important, I assured her. I should let her go. She asked if I was certain everything was all right, noting that I sounded strange. Strange. I was discovering that my only daughter had attempted to terrorize me with a live reptile, and she thought I sounded strange. I told her everything was fine and wished her a pleasant Sunday, ending the call before she could respond, and before my carefully maintained composure could crack completely. The phone trembled in my hands as the full weight of betrayal settled over me. Jessica appeared at my side, reading my face with the intuition developed through 38 years of marriage. She stated that I had heard something. I confirmed that Peter had laughed. In the background, when she had asked what happened, He had laughed as though it was the most amusing joke he had ever encountered. Her hand found my arm, providing a steadying presence in the shifting landscape of our family dynamics. She asked what I intended to do. I looked down at the phone, then toward my home office where the computer held access to bank accounts, credit cards, and all the financial instruments that had kept Samantha financially afloat for 3 consecutive years. I told her I was going to teach my daughter about consequences. 7 o'clock found me seated in my home office, with the door closed and the computer humming quietly in the evening stillness. I had spent the afternoon in careful contemplation, walking through our neighborhood, reviewing 3 decades of financial decisions that had brought us to this moment. The anger had settled into something colder, more purposeful. My desk held the accumulated evidence of a father's generosity. Bank statements showing monthly transfers to cover Samantha's rent. Credit card bills I had paid without question. Insurance premiums, automobile payments, emergency loans that were never repaid. 3 decades of enabling disguised as love. The leather portfolio beside my keyboard contained documents I had reviewed dozens of times. Copies of checks written for her wedding, receipts from the classic car I had sold to pay her gambling debts, bank transfers labeled emergency assistance that had transformed into monthly obligations. Each piece of paper told the same story of a daughter who had learned to view her father as an endless source of money rather than guidance. The computer screen glowed as I navigated to our online banking portal. My fingers moved steadily across the keyboard, typing the familiar passwords I had never shared with Samantha, though she had managed to access plenty without them. First came the credit card account, the same one showing the Reptile Palace charge from 3 weeks earlier. Samantha appeared as an authorized user, a status I had granted her during college for emergencies. 20-year-old emergencies that had multiplied into a permanent lifestyle subsidy. I clicked on the Manage Users option. The system prompted me with security questions, my mother's maiden name, the street where I grew up, simple answers that unlocked access to tools I should have utilized years ago. The screen asked whether I wanted to remove the authorized user, displaying the question in neutral blue text. My cursor hovered over the Confirm button for perhaps 10 seconds, not from hesitation, but from the profound shift I felt occurring within myself. 30 years I have funded your irresponsibility, I thought. Enough. I clicked. The confirmation appeared, stating that user access had been revoked and changes would take effect within 1 business hour. Next came the personal identification number changes. Samantha had somehow learned my codes, probably by watching over my shoulder during one of our many financial rescue operations. I selected new digits, the year Jessica and I were married, numbers meaningful to our relationship but meaningless to our daughter's schemes. The automated payments required more attention. Monthly transfers to her checking account, the recurring payment for her automobile insurance, a subscription service for her gym membership that she had convinced me was essential for her mental health. Each cancellation required confirmation, creating a digital paper trail of my decision to cease being her private financial institution. My hands remained steady throughout the entire process. No trembling, no hesitation. This was not cruelty. It was overdue accountability. I recalled the conversation from the previous month when she had called sobbing about the gambling debts, how she had promised this was the final time, the last crisis I would need to resolve. I had believed her, transferred another $5,000, and told Jessica we were helping our daughter learn responsibility. Instead, I had been teaching her that consequences were optional. The final screen displayed a summary of all changes. Credit access removed. Automatic payments canceled. Personal identification numbers updated. The work of 30 years of enabling undone in 30 minutes of methodical clicking. The screen asked whether I wanted to save changes. Outside my office window, the suburban evening continued its peaceful rhythm. The Hendersons were grilling dinner in their backyard. Mrs. Patterson walked her small dog past our mailbox. Normal families living normal lives, probably not dealing with adult children who sent live serpents as Father's Day gifts. I clicked Save. The confirmation appeared instantly, stating that account changes had been processed, and updated information would be available immediately. Leaning back in my leather desk chair, I experienced something I had not felt in years when it came to Samantha. Control. Not the desperate reactive scrambling to resolve her latest crisis, but the calm authority of a parent who had finally remembered that love sometimes requires saying no. Tomorrow morning, She would discover her financial safety net had been removed.
Her credit card would be declined. Her automatic payments would bounce. Her assumed access to my resources would simply end. For the first time in decades, the consequences of her choices would be entirely her own responsibility to bear.
The phone on my desk remained silent, but I knew that would not last for long. Morning arrived with unusual tranquility. I sat at our kitchen table with coffee and the newspaper, watching sunlight filter through Jessica's herb garden on the windowsill. For the first time in years, I felt no anxiety about potential financial emergencies, no dread of manipulative telephone calls. Jessica moved quietly around the kitchen, refilling my coffee cup with the comfortable efficiency of 38 years of shared mornings. She had asked no questions about my evening in the office, but her slight smile suggested she understood perfectly what I had accomplished. The telephone rang at 8:15. Samantha's name appeared on the caller identification, exactly as anticipated. I allowed it to ring twice more before answering, using those additional seconds to center myself. I greeted her pleasantly, but she immediately demanded to know what I had done. Her voice struck me like a physical assault, shrill with panic. She explained that her card was not working, that she had attempted to purchase groceries and had been declined. The automatic payment for her automobile insurance had bounced. She demanded to know what was happening. I took a sip of coffee before responding. I told her calmly that I knew she had sent me that Father's Day gift. The silence stretched for several heartbeats. When she spoke again, her voice had shifted from panic to defensive fury. She accused me of losing my mind and demanded to know how I could set her up like this. Set her up, not a denial asking what I was talking about. Not confusion asking what Father's Day gift I meant. The woman who had sent me a serpent was now accusing me of setting traps for her. Her reaction confirmed everything I needed to know. I explained calmly that I had not done anything to her. I had simply stopped paying for her irresponsibility. She declared the situation insane, insisting I could not simply cut her off without warning. She had bills, obligations, responsibilities. Responsibilities. I let the word hang between us. Like the responsibility to treat your parents with basic respect, I asked. Like the responsibility to manage your own finances instead of depending on mine. Jessica had paused her morning routine to observe my face, watching for signs of stress. But I felt remarkably calm, almost detached from Samantha's hysteria. She pleaded with me, claiming I did not understand, that she and Peter were struggling right now. The apartment rent was due, and her car payment was approaching. I interrupted, pointing out it was my car payment that I had been making for 2 years, and my money paying her apartment rent every month. Perhaps it was time she understood what actual financial responsibility looked like. She declared that if I wanted to play games, I should not expect to see my grandchildren anytime soon. Emma and Jake would not even remember me by the time she was finished. I cut her off with quiet firmness, addressing her by name. I told her those threats had stopped working yesterday morning. The telephone went silent except for her rapid breathing. I could almost hear her recalibrating, searching for the manipulation tactic that had always succeeded before. She whispered that she could not believe I was doing this to her. She was my daughter. She was struggling. And instead of helping her, I was punishing her for something she had not even done. Something she had not even done. Still no direct denial. No confusion about what gift I had referenced. Just the blanket deflection of someone who knew exactly what she had done and was angry about facing consequences. I told her that her struggle was not my responsibility. Her choices had created her situation. Her choices had sent that package. Her choices would determine what happened next. She accused me of being ridiculous, complaining that one little prank had caused me to completely lose my mind. One little prank. There it was. Not quite a confession, but close enough to confirm what her panicked overreaction had already revealed. She had sent me a live serpent as a little prank and now expected me to continue funding her lifestyle. I pointed out that a prank involving a dangerous animal was not little, and a father cutting off financial support after 30 years of enabling was not losing his mind. It was finally finding it. Her voice turned arctic. She declared this was not over and called me old man. She asked if I thought I could control her by controlling money, promising we would see about that. The line went dead. I set the phone down gently and looked at Jessica, who had watched the entire conversation with growing admiration. The morning sunlight still streamed through her herbs. The coffee still tasted perfect. Jessica observed that Samantha was coming here, probably with Peter in tow. They would want to continue this conversation in person. She asked if I was ready for that confrontation. I considered the question seriously. Was I prepared for my daughter to arrive at our home with her unemployed husband, demanding access to money she had never earned, threatening grandchildren she had already weaponized? I told her yes, I believed I was ready. The sound of a car engine roaring into our driveway shattered the morning calm. Tires squealed against the asphalt as the vehicle stopped abruptly, followed by the sharp slam of two car doors. Jessica and I exchanged a glance.
We both knew who had arrived. Heavy footsteps marched across our front walkway with determined rhythm.
The doorbell rang once, sharp and demanding, then immediately again when no one answered fast enough. I stood slowly, feeling remarkably calm, despite the approaching confrontation. I told Jessica to stay where she was. She refused, stating that we were in this together. The doorbell gave way to aggressive pounding. I walked to the front entrance and opened it to find Samantha and Peter standing on our porch like a two-person army prepared for battle. Samantha's face was flushed red with anger, her hair disheveled as though she had dressed hastily and driven here in fury. Peter loomed behind her, his expression dark with malice I had never seen directed at me before. Samantha announced that we needed to talk. I pointed out that we had already talked that morning, and I had thought I was quite clear. She laughed harshly, calling me insane. She insisted I could not just cut her off because of some ridiculous misunderstanding about a Father's Day package. Even now, standing on my doorstep demanding money, she could not bring herself to admit what she had done. I told her there was no misunderstanding. She had sent me a serpent, and I had responded appropriately. Peter stepped forward, his bulk filling more of the doorway. He addressed me dismissively as old man and suggested maybe I had not thought this through properly. Samantha had expenses and responsibilities. Children needed things. I responded by asking about children whose mother threatened to keep them away from their grandparents when she did not receive money. Samantha's face contorted with desperate fury. She declared that if I wanted to play hardball, I would never see my grandchildren again. Emma and Jake would grow up knowing their grandfather had chosen money over family. The words that had once been my greatest fear now felt powerless against the clarity I had gained. I looked at my daughter and saw not the child I had raised, but the manipulative stranger she had become. I told her quietly that what she described was not a threat. It was a blessing. The shock on her face was complete. This was not the response she had expected, not the devastating blow that had always brought me to my knees before. Peter's mouth fell open. Samantha stammered in disbelief. I explained that if she was the kind of person who used children as weapons against their grandparents, then perhaps it was better that they were not exposed to that kind of manipulation while they were young. Peter's expression shifted to something darker. He stepped forward, close enough that I could smell the anger radiating from him. He stated they knew where I lived, and knew my routines and schedule. He suggested I might want to reconsider my position. I felt Jessica tense behind me, but I remained perfectly still. I asked him directly whether he was threatening me. He claimed he was merely pointing out that family relationships worked both ways. If I wanted to cut them off, fine, but I should not expect them to disappear quietly. I responded that actually, that was exactly what I expected. And if they chose not to disappear quietly, that would become a matter for the police rather than family negotiation. Samantha grabbed Peter's arm, perhaps sensing he was pushing into territory that could have legal consequences. But her touch did not calm him. It seemed to fuel his aggression further. He declared that I thought I was so intelligent, that cutting off their money made me feel powerful. He claimed there were other ways to obtain what they needed. I agreed there were indeed other ways, such as obtaining employment, for instance. It was a novel concept, but people had been supporting themselves through work for centuries. Samantha hissed that this was not over. She warned that I would regret treating them this way, that family does not abandon family, and there would be consequences for my actions. I pointed out that there already were consequences. They were living them at that very moment. They stared at me for a long moment, perhaps finally comprehending that no amount of threats, guilt, or manipulation was going to restore their access to my resources. The man who had spent 30 years serving as their personal financial institution had simply closed for business. Without another word, Samantha spun on her heel and stalked back to their vehicle. Peter followed, but not before giving me one final menacing look. I watched them drive away, their car engine revving unnecessarily loud. Only when their taillights disappeared did I close the front door and turn to Jessica. Her face was pale,
but her eyes held something they had not contained in years: pride. I told her we were going to need legal counsel. Evening brought the quiet normalcy that had become precious in our household.
Jessica and I sat at our kitchen table after dinner, the domestic routine providing comfort after the morning's chaos. She sipped chamomile tea while I nursed my second cup of coffee, both of us processing the day's events. The kitchen had always been our sanctuary for serious conversations. It was here we had discussed purchasing the house, planned for retirement, talked through concerns about Samantha's early struggles with money management. Now it served as the place where we contemplated the complete dissolution of our family relationship. I mentioned that I kept thinking about when she was 8 years old, asking Jessica if she remembered the Mother's Day breakfast Samantha had made. Burned toast and orange juice with too much pulp, but she had been so proud of her efforts. I did remember Samantha in her pink pajamas, standing on a kitchen stool to reach the counter, determined to surprise us with breakfast in bed. The memory felt like it belonged to someone else's family now. She used to draw us pictures, I recalled. Stick figures of our family holding hands. I had kept them in my office desk drawer for years. Jessica admitted she still had some stored in that memory box upstairs. Her voice carried maternal grief. She reminded me that despite everything that had happened today, Samantha was still our daughter. The words I had been expecting all day. Jessica's instinct to heal, to find middle ground, to somehow restore what had been broken. It was one of the qualities I had fallen in love with. This unwavering belief that families could overcome anything. I acknowledged gently that Samantha had crossed a line, but I told her I had one more step to take. Her teacup paused halfway to her lips. She asked what kind of step I meant. I looked at my wife's face, seeing the concern reflected there, the hope that whatever I was planning might somehow bring our daughter back instead of pushing her further away. How could I explain that bringing her back was no longer the goal? I described it as something permanent. Something that would ensure this morning's scene never happened again. She correctly guessed that I was talking about changing the will. It was not a question. Jessica knew me well enough to follow my thought process, to understand that legal protection was the only solution remaining. I confirmed that was among other things I was considering.
She was quiet for a long moment, wrestling with the implications. Changing our estate planning would be more than a financial decision. It would be a formal acknowledgement that our daughter was no longer trustworthy. She mentioned the grandchildren,
Emma and Jake. I said they would be better off not learning that love could be purchased with money. I reached across the table and took her hand. I explained that what Samantha had done today was not desperation, it was calculated cruelty. The serpent, the threats, the manipulation, that was who she had chosen to become. But if we cut her out completely, we would protect ourselves from future abuse. We would protect our marriage from constantly managing her crises.
We would protect our retirement from being slowly drained away by someone who viewed us as a resource rather than as parents.
Jessica squeezed my hand, her thumb tracing across my knuckles in the gesture that had comforted me through decades of smaller challenges. This was not a smaller challenge, however. This was the end of something fundamental. She asked whether it would stop her. If I changed everything legally, would Samantha finally leave us alone? I explained it would remove her incentive for contact. No access to money, no inheritance to protect, no leverage to maintain.
She would have to find other people to manipulate. The pragmatism of it felt cold but necessary. Samantha would move on to easier targets, people who had not yet learned to recognize her patterns.
Jessica whispered that she hated that it had come to this point. I agreed that I did as well, but I refused to spend our remaining years being held hostage by threats and manipulation. I would not allow her to destroy what we had built together over decades. Outside our kitchen window, the suburban evening continued its peaceful rhythm. The Hendersons were walking their dog. Mrs. Patterson was watering her garden. Normal people living normal lives. Jessica asked when I would proceed. I told her tomorrow morning. I would call Margaret Summers first thing. She had handled our legal work for 15 years.
She would know exactly what needed to be done to make it ironclad. Jessica nodded slowly, accepting the inevitable even as it broke her heart. She asked what would happen if Samantha found out. I acknowledged she would eventually discover the changes, but by then the legal protections would be firmly in place. Her anger would not be able to touch us anymore. I stood up from the table, carrying our empty cups to the sink. Behind me, I heard Jessica's quiet sigh. Not disagreement, but grief for the daughter we had lost. Tomorrow, I would take that final step. Tonight, I would hold my wife
and let her mourn the family we had believed we were. Margaret Summers's law office occupied the third floor of a granite building downtown, its walls lined with legal volumes that spoke of 15 years protecting families like ours. I sat across from her mahogany desk with a manila folder of documents, feeling calmer than I had in weeks. She removed her reading glasses and acknowledged that when I had called that morning, I had mentioned needing comprehensive legal protection. She asked me to tell her what had been occurring. Margaret had handled our wills, property transfers, and Jessica's mother's estate. She knew us as the stable couple who planned ahead and paid bills promptly. What I was about to describe would sound like an entirely different family. I explained the inheritance argument, the serpent delivery, the blocked credit cards, yesterday's threatening confrontation. Margaret listened without interruption, occasionally making notes, her expression growing more serious with each detail. I concluded by mentioning that Peter had said they knew where we lived and knew our routines. It had felt like a direct threat of harm. She set down her pen and leaned back in her chair. She stated that this went beyond a family disagreement. I was describing harassment and intimidation. We needed to address this on multiple fronts. I told her that was exactly what I had been hoping she would say. Margaret pulled out a fresh legal pad. She suggested we start with my will, noting that I had mentioned wanting to restructure my inheritance. I told her I wanted my money to go toward my grandchildren's education, not to my daughter's casino habits. She called that a wise decision and outlined the framework. We could create an educational trust fund that would provide for Emma and Jake's schooling, college expenses, and legitimate educational needs, while preventing any access by their parents. An independent trustee would manage the funds, releasing money only for documented educational expenses. Samantha and Peter would have no access, no control, no ability to manipulate the children's inheritance. I asked about Jessica's protection. She assured me Jessica would be fully protected, of course. The house, our retirement accounts, her security, nothing would change there. This would only affect what would have gone to Samantha. Next came the restraining order documentation. Margaret opened a new file and began systematically recording yesterday's confrontation, the threatening language, the escalating pattern that had culminated in actual intimidation. She noted that the serpent incident was particularly concerning. Using live animals to frighten elderly parents demonstrated planning and malice that courts took seriously. I asked how long this process would take. She explained the will modifications could be finalized within the week. The restraining order could be filed that very day. Once it was granted, any contact from Samantha or Peter would become a legal matter rather than a family dispute. I felt something release in my chest, a tension I had been carrying for months. The weight of being perpetually available for Samantha's crises, of walking on eggshells to avoid triggering her threats, of enabling destructive behavior. All of it was ending. Margaret mentioned there was one more thing she recommended. Based on what I had described, she advised documenting everything for potential future legal action. I should keep records of any attempts to contact us, any violations, any attempts to involve the grandchildren. I asked whether she believed the situation would get worse before it improved. She explained that people who used manipulation and threats did not usually accept boundaries gracefully. When Samantha discovered she had been cut out of the will and served with a restraining order, her reaction might be significant. But that no longer frightened me. With legal protections in place, her anger would be directed at a system designed to handle such behavior, not at two elderly parents trying to enjoy their retirement years. Margaret's assistant brought in the prepared documents. As I signed my name to each page, I felt the satisfying finality of decisions made and implemented. 30 years of financial enabling was officially ending. Our home would be legally protected from harassment. She informed me the restraining order should be approved by close of business that day. Court officers would serve both Samantha and Peter by tomorrow morning. After that, any contact with me or Jessica would become a criminal matter. I stood to leave, shaking hands with the woman who had just helped me reclaim control of my own life. Outside her office windows, the city continued its normal rhythm. She called out as I reached her door. She told me I had made the right choices. My family's safety and security came first. I nodded, tucking the folder under my arm. Tomorrow morning, Samantha would discover that manipulation was no longer an option. Tonight, Jessica and I would sleep peacefully, knowing the law was finally on our side. 2 days passed in the most peaceful quiet I had experienced in years. Jessica and I fell back into the comfortable routines that had been constantly interrupted by Samantha's crises.
Morning coffee without dreading phone calls. Afternoon walks without checking for missed messages. Evening dinners without discussing the latest financial emergency. On Thursday afternoon, Margaret called to confirm what I had been anticipating. She informed me the documents had been delivered at 2:15 that day. Both Samantha and Peter had been served with the restraining order, and they had received copies of the will modifications. It was finished. I thanked her and hung up, then sat quietly in my chair for several minutes. Outside our window, Mrs. Patterson was planting spring flowers in her garden. The Henderson children were riding bicycles on the sidewalk.
Normal suburban life continuing its peaceful rhythm. Jessica asked whether the papers had been delivered. I confirmed they had arrived that afternoon. It was finished. She came and sat beside me, taking my hand in hers. We did not need to discuss what Samantha's reaction might be, or whether she would try to find ways around the legal barriers Margaret had erected. The law was clear, the protections were comprehensive, and for the first time in 30 years, we were truly free from her manipulation. I thought about the daughter I had raised, the little girl who had drawn stick figure families and made breakfast in bed on special occasions. That child had grown into someone who sent live serpents to her father and threatened to weaponize his grandchildren against him. The transformation had been gradual enough that I had spent decades making excuses for increasingly unacceptable behavior. But the woman who had stood on my doorstep demanding money and making threats was not someone I needed to enable any longer. The legal documents had created the boundaries that love alone could never establish. In a way, they got what they wanted. I was no longer in their lives. The irony was not lost on me. Samantha had spent years threatening to cut off my access to Emma and Jake whenever I failed to comply with her financial demands. Now, through her own escalating behavior, she had ensured that separation permanently, while simultaneously losing any claim to the inheritance she had been so desperate to control. Emma and Jake would be provided for through their educational trust fund, managed by professionals who could not be manipulated or threatened. Their college expenses, tutoring, books, legitimate educational needs, all secured without giving their parents access to resources they had proven incapable of managing responsibly. Jessica squeezed my hand. She asked whether I thought Samantha understood what she had lost. I told her she would eventually. The restraining order meant any attempt to contact us would become a criminal matter. The will changes meant there was no inheritance worth fighting for, no financial incentive to maintain even hostile contact. She would have to find other people to manipulate. For 30 years I had been Samantha's safety net, catching her every fall while she learned nothing from the experience. I had sold my classic car to pay her gambling debts. I had covered her rent when she claimed unexpected emergencies. I had written check after check, always believing that this time would be different, that this crisis would be the last one. The serpent had been her final communication with me. Everything she wanted to say about our relationship had been contained in that box. Dangerous, venomous, designed to frighten and intimidate. But instead of driving me back into compliance, it had driven me to Margaret's office and the legal protections I should have sought years earlier. As the sun set through our kitchen window, Jessica and I prepared dinner together, with the easy cooperation of a couple who no longer carried the weight of constant family drama. No phone calls interrupted our conversation. No emergency texts demanded immediate financial rescue. No threats hung over our heads about access to grandchildren. The quiet felt profound, like the silence after a long, exhausting storm has finally passed. Tomorrow we would wake up in a house legally protected from harassment. Our retirement savings would remain intact, earning interest for our own security, rather than being slowly drained by someone else's poor choices. Our marriage would continue without the constant stress of managing an adult child's manufactured crises. I had reclaimed my role as a father who loved his daughter enough to refuse to enable her destruction of herself and others. Legal boundaries had replaced emotional manipulation. Professional consequences had replaced family guilt. The law had given me back my life. Tonight, for the first time in decades, I would sleep without wondering what tomorrow's crisis would cost me